welcome to Season 9 of the Lifegiver Podcast, a place for honest conversation about you, your relationships, and the leader you're meant to be to those around you. I'm your host, Corie Weathers. I'm a wife, mom, licensed professional counselor, and many other things, but today I'm here to breathe life back into you. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Corie Weathers Podcast. This is Corie. If you are just joining me, this is Season 9, where I recently changed the name of the Lifegiver Podcast to the Corie Weathers Podcast, mainly so that it would be easier to search on all of the platforms that you guys have joined me on. And as you've noticed in this episode, based on the episode title, we're going to be talking about pivots. And if you are just joining me for the first time on this episode, it's a crazy one for you to join me on because this is the finale of Season 9. And can I just tell you, this is the finale of the Lifegiver Podcast, of the Corie Weathers Podcast. Now, before I lose you and before there's a reaction, there's more to come. Hence the theme of today, which is about pivoting. And we're going to talk here in just a minute about in which direction I'm pivoting. And there is more content that's going to come out to you in podcasting form, but more to come on that in just a minute. So if you're just now joining me for the first time, please know this podcast and all of the seasons before it are not going anywhere. They're not being archived. They're still accessible. They will stay on the platforms for you to go back and listen to. But this has been a crazy season 9 for me, but especially for those who appreciate consistent programming, consistent podcasting, and really relying on episodes to come out, weekly, monthly, however you like to hear them. Season 9 has not been like that for me. It's been very inconsistent. And I'm so sorry about that. And I think I'm going to explain why it's been like that and why it's led to this pivot. And hopefully there's some kind of life lessons that we can pull from it as well, especially if you're in a place where you are feeling that there is a shift coming in your life and maybe you are needing to pivot somehow and you're trying to figure out, how do I do that? Especially if the new opportunities in front of you feel overwhelming, if you feel like you've got this sense of imposter syndrome, like, I don't know if I'm ready to take on that overwhelming of a risky decision. I mean, honestly, now that I think about it, it kind of goes back to the first episode where we were talking about the hero's journey, where it was really about, like, how do you know how to step out into this next level of whatever you're passionate about, especially if you have that feeling of imposter syndrome. And really that is the inner workings of a pivot moment. Of course, if I say pivot, especially Gen X, probably Friends is coming to mind with Ross's pivot around trying to get the couch up the stairs. But we're going to use that word a lot today. So I'm just going to get the clip out of the way and share with you the Friends, at least the audio version of the Friends clip around pivot.
Hey, Ross. I brought reinforcements.
Oh, great. What, you brought Joey?
Well, I brought the next best thing.
Chandler? You brought Chandler? The next best thing would be Monica.
I would be offended, but Monica is freakishly strong, so.
Look, I drew a sketch of how we're going to do it, okay? Rach, that's you. That's the couch.
Ooh, what's that?
Oh, that's me.
Wow. Certainly think a lot of yourself.
Oh, that's my arm.
Oh, I see. I thought you just really, really liked your new couch.
Just follow my lead.
Okay.
Come on, Chandler. All right, okay. Here we go. All right, ready? Yeah. Turn. Okay. Turn.
I don't think we can turn anymore.
I just don't think it's gonna fit.
Oh, yeah, it will. Come on, up. Yes. Here we go. Pivot. pivot anymore.
You think?
All right, let's bring it back down and try again.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay, yeah, I think it's really stuck now.
Can't believe that didn't work.
I know, me neither. I mean, you had a sketch.
Oh, you know what? What did you mean when you said pivot?
Now that we've scratched that itch, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what this last season has been for me and maybe why there's been some inconsistency. I've tried to put myself out there on Instagram, on social media, and even a little bit here on the podcast to try to explain what I was going through as I was going through it, and not ever really fully having the words. And I'm sure I'm going to have better words in hindsight when it's time. But really, I think you guys can all understand that, since the administration change, and this is not about politics necessarily, but just there was so much change happening so fast. Our family was going through a ton of change. We are 2 weeks into being empty nesters. That's another episode for another time. But we also PCS'd, and there's just been a lot of shifts and a lot of changes, a lot of life change, and that was stressful enough. And so when January hit, I was really, and still am, really riding the wave, if you will, of events and training that came out of Military Culture Shift. Such a joy to continue to invest in the community, invest in leadership, and talk about some of the shifts and the changes and the trends that are impacting the military force today. And so I am doing a lot of traveling, and I'm so grateful for that. So many opportunities to invest in the next generation of leaders and also consult leaders on how to navigate these shifts, as there was lots of just changes, what felt like every single day of administrative changes, executive orders that were coming out that were impacting our family, impacting your families, impacting marriages. And so really, I was trying to navigate that myself and also find that wisdom to share in a way that would encourage you. And that turned into just a really difficult situation to put out consistent content when I was really needing time and space to process what I was thinking about, what's the greater wisdom, what needs to be shared, what doesn't need to be shared. And I always try to be really protective on these platforms of not putting out my first draft and trying to find that final wisdom as best as I can. What are the lessons that I can share? And just being careful to not just leak out opinions and leak out reactions. And I'm not saying that once I find wisdom that it's the ultimate level of wisdom, but just, you understand, it's that next level of wisdom that is at least beyond the first draft. And so that was taking me a lot more time to find my words and then decide what to put in the podcast or put out in content. So that's one of the reasons why I've been very inconsistent over the last several months, is just not knowing what to write, if I needed to write something, if I needed to even have a voice on that topic, if it was in my lane, outside of my lane. And there just seemed to be a lot of things outside my lane. And also during Lent, I just went off of social media altogether, which was a wonderful exercise. I highly recommend it. And it was just a really nice time to step away from at least that space. And so that's one of the reasons why I was inconsistent. But now that I kind of have the words for it, another reason is because when I put out Military Culture Shift, I was really excited to creatively do something different in the podcast space. One of my dreams is to be a part of a documentary, to do a docuseries. That's not a dream that I necessarily see happening in reality, because it takes a team, and I'm a one-man show, and I don't have access really to a full team. And so when it came time to launch Military Culture Shift, I wanted to model what it means to reach the next generation by doing something different in the podcasting space. And so being just one person, not being able to really fully do a well thought out, storyboarded docuseries that could go with the book, I did the best that I could to dabble in a little bit of that and put out the Military Culture Shift podcast that was a limited series leadership podcast, meaning it was only going to be one season, that really gave me the creative space to stretch a little bit, play with some scripting, play with some producing, bring in different music, to really kind of do a next level version of storytelling. And it was a lot of hard work, but I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm really proud of that series that went with the book. I'm just really proud of it. And so once I finished it and rested on the other side, and like I said, we PCS'd, trying to get our kids ready for college, all of that. When it came time to come back to this podcast and launch a new season, which was this season, season 9, I just found that I had evolved in that creative stretching, and I didn't know how to come back to the old style of podcasting when I found myself really creatively enjoying this other version of storytelling on the other podcast. And so I really struggled to come back and just jump into interviews, jump into kind of rambling into a mic in a way that wasn't what I felt you deserved, which is high quality content. You hopefully feel like I'm putting out high quality content, but for me, I really wanted to not just put out things that contributed to noise. So that's one of the other reasons why I pulled back off social media, didn't write as much, and really started to ask myself, am I just contributing to the noise? Am I just putting something out to put it out for that sake? Or am I really delivering content that is worthy of you really wanting to sit down and listen to it and not waste your time or mine? And so that also slowed down my my willingness and my ability and my creativity to put out podcast episodes, because I really was examining my heart and my mind and my motives to ask, is this something that needs to go out into this space that's actually helpful to you? Or am I just putting something out to say I put something out? So again, that's one of the reasons why it was so inconsistent, is I would really wait until I really had something to say and not let the clock or the timing or even the expectation of consistency to drive the content. So as you can hear, there was a combination of factors. There was wanting to put out that high quality content. There was the creative side of I did something really creative over there, and then it was really hard to come back to what I had done before. And in doing so, I realized I evolved. When I first started this podcast, if you go back to the very first episode, and I'm almost encouraging you to not go back to the very first episode, because this podcast has been through so many evolutions, and I enjoyed that. I enjoyed each season having a different theme, and it took me a couple seasons to realize I could actually do that. So when it first started, it was, I think, named the Military Spouse Podcast, and then it became the Lifegiver Podcast, and there were seasons where I touched base on what it means to be a military spouse, and then later got really more into marriage dynamics and parenting dynamics and really what was happening in your home. And then as my career and my opportunities and my thought process really started to evolve into, these topics, these trends, these issues aren't just happening in our homes, but they're happening across the globe in all branches of service. And oh, by the way, some of the things that we're experiencing in our families are because of the institution that we are so heavily attached to and sometimes consumed by. And so this is actually a cultural dynamic, or there's some of these things that we're saying to ourselves, and even examining our motives that are more cultural than they are personal. And so that led to writing Military Culture Shift, where I was really zooming out even further and looking at the culture and the system that we're in and really dissecting the beliefs, the things that motivate us, and really even starting to question some of those things. Should they motivate us to think, behave, believe the way that we are, or are they things worth challenging? And so as I started to evolve in my career, evolve in my thinking, so did some of my topics and conversations, and definitely some of the things that I'm training on, teaching on, and the conversations that I'm having out in the world, which I don't really push out anymore. Like, I don't jump onto social media and share all the places that I've gone and the people that I'm serving, because sometimes those people, A, don't want to be posted on social media, or B, I'm working with a population that is is special forces, that has clearance or whatever, that definitely don't want to be posted on social media. And so it got really hard to share what I was doing, but also I didn't feel the need to necessarily crowd up, social media posts with just sharing what I was doing. And again, going back to what is actually good quality content that is worth your time, even if you just come across it in your social media feed. So I was going through an evolution and have for the past couple years. And I think it took me this year to really figure out how to name it and describe it and to embrace it. That's one of the reasons why the theme behind this episode is about pivoting. How do you pivot? What are some of the fears that we have when we decide to pivot? And how do we know when we're going in a direction because it's the right direction to go in versus, we feel the fear, feel the scarcity, feel the concerns about pivoting, and it's maybe red flags that are saying we shouldn't. And so this is another significant evolution moment or pivot moment in my life and my career. And so coming back to this podcast, the more that I realize that some of the topics and conversations that I'm wanting to have at this stage of my life don't fit as easily into this podcast, the Lifegiver Podcast. And so when I then started to think about, well, what does that look like next? Goodness, so much thought, so much brainstorming, so much just mapping it out. What would it look like? I knew that the best and easiest way to do that was going to be wrapping up this podcast and just letting it be what it has been. Just to not try to change it, not try to rebrand it, but just let it be what it is and let this new evolution, this new thing start separately over here. So I myself am going through kind of a rebrand, naming this evolution that I am going through in my career and in my life and my work, and at the same time inviting you to continue the journey with me as I continue to evolve, and hopefully inspiring you and encouraging you to take a look at your own life and think about, where am I evolving? Where do I go from here, and how do I do that in a healthy way? So I just want to thank you so much for those of you who've been part of this journey for so long. There's so many people that are coming to my mind. Sarah Foster, who was one of my co-hosts, I think in season 7. Jennifer Hamrick has been just a long friend, long-time listener, who has given me permission so many times to evolve, to pivot, and to feel the freedom to do that. But also loving to listen. I could name a million names. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being my friend, for supporting, for listening. Whether you are a military spouse, a veteran spouse, a first responder spouse, this podcast has been through so many iterations, so many evolutions, and you've been along for the ride. And I so appreciate that. And thank you for giving me the opportunity and space and freedom to be creative, to explore different themes, to explore different ways to produce the episode, bringing in co-hosts, bringing in Matt sometimes, bringing in all these different fantastic interviews, has been such a lovely ride. And so I want to just really quickly tell you where we're headed, where I'm headed, and also maybe pull some lessons that hopefully will inspire you and encourage you on some of the things that I've been thinking through as I think about pivoting, that will hopefully be helpful if you are approaching a season in your life where maybe you're ready to pivot as well. So just to get it out of the way and to ease any questions that might be coming to the surface as you're listening to this, here is the plan. Here's the plan. So this is not just the season finale of season 9, but this is the podcast finale of the Corie Weathers podcast, formerly the Lifegiver Podcast, formerly, I think it was Lifegiver, the Military Spouse Podcast, whatever version of it that you have known. This is the very bittersweet but lovely, warm ending to an incredible season that feels crazy for me to let it go, whether it's because of just the nostalgia and the connection of just being here for 9 seasons, or whether you might be saying it's crazy for you to leave the downloads and the subscribers that you have. It is risky. It's so risky. But where I'm headed next is I creatively want to evolve and want to explore how much I enjoyed really putting thoughtful producing into the episodes, similar to the way that I did Military Culture Shift, that podcast. So again, I'm a one-man show, but the Military Culture Shift podcast, so that link, that space, if you subscribe to it before, that is the podcast feed that is going to rebrand. So if you have not listened, those episodes are not going to go away. They're going to stay on that feed. But that podcast, the Military Culture Shift podcast, is going to go through the rebrand, where the new podcast is going to be called Restored. And I'm going to tell you the story behind it, but I'm really, really excited. And I'm going to share with you a trailer for that in just a minute. But that podcast, it seemed like a really natural place for the rebrand to happen over on that podcast feed, where there's a whole kind of first season, if you will, of Military Culture Shift, with that scripting, with the creativity that really inspired me in the first place, to evolve into a second season that will be the rebrand called Restored, that will also have some of this narration, some of the storytelling, a little bit more, or a whole lot more production value, and hopefully high quality. I already feel like it's a high quality shift into a different kind of season that I really do believe that when you sit down and listen to it, it'll feel still like you have your pocket Corie, which is what a lot of people have said. I wish I could have Corie in my pocket, like saying the things that I need to hear. So there is going to be a little bit of wisdom that I hope to share, but it's going to be more produced, where it's a little bit more scripted. And I'm going to bring in phenomenal interviews and storytelling in a way that I think will really add value to your life, whether it's at home, whether it's in your career, or wherever you are. So here is the story behind Restored. The actual title of it is Restored: Stories of Conflict, Healing, and Peace. And this is why I came up with this title. I worked really hard, did a lot of Googling, did a lot of soul searching. And really what it comes down to is, regardless of whether I've worked with individuals, couples, families, leadership, teams, cultural dynamics, honestly, when I really simmered it down, it all came down to, what can I do to reduce conflict, or teach skills that help us reduce conflict and pursue peace? And I don't mean like the naive, I just want world peace, even though I do, but that naive version of the concept of peace. It really is more about how we all long on the inside of ourselves to feel that we can be at peace with our decisions, to resolve the conflict within us. And that conflict is a part of life. When we're making a decision, when we are engaging in relationships, relationships will always involve a healthy level of conflict. But when it is really consuming our life and taking over our life, we can find ourselves really in these stuck points where we really need help resolving that conflict for the sake of peace as well. So again, conflict can be very healthy. And I would argue that if there's a relationship where there never is conflict, I would say there's a vulnerability problem. So conflict can be necessary, but I think the whole point of conflict is to resolve it in order to have peace. Not many people know this, but when I went to college, I actually majored at first as a vocal performance major. And so I was a music major before I was ever a psychology major. And one of the things they taught us in music theory is that when you are writing music, you write it in a way such that you build tension through minor chords, through dissonance, that when you build tension, the listener is invited into the conflict where they feel the tension in the music, but you build the tension in order to also release through music, through those major chords, through those resolution moments in music, that it's the resolution that brings peace and closure, and you end the song with a sense of resolution. And I think that that's just a natural part of the creative world, that in art, there has to be conflict and tension in order to point us toward resolution. We see it, like I just said, in music, and also relationships are that way as well. So conflict has a purpose, but if it doesn't resolve to a place of peace, then we're not finished yet, right? So when I thought more and more about this story, really, of the necessity of conflict and the necessity of resolving into a place of peace within ourselves and with others, I realized that's been my whole life. Everything that I've devoted my time and energy and education and experience and writing and producing has been about that. And it's a lot of what this podcast has been about: resolving conflict and tension with your kids, in your marriage. And so it felt like the next step for me to launch this rebrand, to talk about and give a space for stories of how to do that. And so what will be a little bit different in this space that really, I think, shows the evolution that's happening within me and the areas that I would like to pivot in even just my thinking and in my conversation, is that I find that even for Matt and I, being 18 years in, eventually he's going to retire out. And so I can sense, as we go into this empty nesting season, it's a new opportunity to think differently about our time and our space and our priorities. And when he transitions out, it's going to be another opportunity for that. And that is true for everybody listening, that there's also a story arc that happens in our lives, that we go through conflict and we go through these identity shifts, and that we also should find resolution in these new seasons that come upon us where we're invited to pivot. I realized that I wanted to have more conversations about not just what was happening in the military culture, but what was happening outside the military culture, that there's so many things that we go through that are not just about us being in the military, but they're human topics. They're topics that everyone everywhere might be wrestling with. And I wanted to connect the dots on that. And so if we're going to talk about transitioning out of the military, I want to bring in stories where when you're wrestling with that conflict internally about how and when to retire, or how to deal with the conflict of what matters most and how do I prioritize my time and my energy around what matters most, instead of just focusing on how that plays out in our military world, I wanted to explore what that looks like outside in other situations too, to really pull us together in a human narrative that we are all human beings wrestling with some of the very same questions. And so Restored, the podcast, is not only going to explore some of these military topics, because I think that's true for where I am and what I've studied and how I've served this community and will continue to serve this community. But sometimes some of the answers are looking outside of our bubble and learning from other cultures, other conversations, other stories that sound like it doesn't have anything to do with us, but it is. And that by listening to those stories, it bridges the military-civilian divide and we see each other as human beings. I want to talk to experts that are in our military space, but pair them with experts outside that maybe you wouldn't normally go to and talk to and listen to because you didn't realize that there was a connection. So I'm going to bring in experts on conflict resolution. I'm going to bring in stories about peace in other countries, historians that can talk about stories of the past of resolving conflict and how that impacts a culture. So there's lots of different directions I can go with that. But whether it's a personal story of finding peace and resolving conflict personally, individually, and what that looks like inwardly, or whether that's talking with an expert about what does conflict and peace look like in making those decisions in your relationship, or whether it's on a team, or whether it's in our nation, boy, do we need more conversations about that. So I really wanted it to be a positive place, positive, high quality content that is different, so different, hopefully, from the negativity, the chaos, the blaming, the encouragement to enter into conflict, and instead giving you tools to resolve the conflict. That's what I want to be about. How do I be someone that can encourage you that when you are going out into the world or stepping into your relationships in your home, aiming for peace and really getting discouraged because of all the negativity and conflict and discouragement, that we are giving you tools to resolve, to find peace within yourself, to set healthy boundaries, but also how to love. And that sounds so cliche. And yet I want us to learn how to do that. I want to learn how to do that. I want to be able to go out from my house, walk into this world, as nasty as it feels like it has become, and still love. That's what I want to do. And I hope to bring in the people and the conversations that encourage you to do the same. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited about it. I hope you hear that and you're excited as well. And so that is where Restored Stories of Conflict, Healing, and Peace is going to go. So you can find the link so that you can subscribe now. I've already recorded a couple of episodes and interviews, produced a couple as well. Had Matt listen to them, like trying to get some feedback on whether or not this pivot is the right one to do, and have gotten some really great feedback from different people. And so I'm really, really excited to launch it. So I don't have an exact date of when it's launching, but I want you to go ahead and subscribe or resubscribe to what was the Military Culture Shift podcast feed. You should be able to go onto your platforms right now and see the Restored album cover and look it up by name. Restored Stories of Conflict, Healing, and Peace should be searchable. But I'll also put in the show notes the link so that you can subscribe now. And I'll also put out on social media when it launches so that you can be prepared for that first episode, which I'm so excited is already produced and done and ready to go. And so I'm really excited to send it out. I hope to have a Substack newsletter that will go with each of those episodes. Again, giving some high quality content, not every week, but like once a month, that really grounds the content in a practical way. So you might have kind of less of me coming at you, but when it does arrive in your inbox or on your podcast feed, it's high quality and you're excited to listen to it. So unless you're listening to it in hindsight and it's already all uploaded and you can binge it, it's up to you. Just to wrap up that section, I'm going to close out this amazing feed, this amazing podcast that's been with me for almost 10 years now, and rebrand on the other podcast feed that was formerly the Military Culture Shift podcast feed. So hopefully you'll follow me there, and I'm excited to see you over there. And again, I'll leave this one up. So let's talk about pivoting for just a minute, because I've been thinking obviously so much about this topic. As I work with people and they are thinking about changes they want to make in their life, changes that they want to make in their business, often it is around the theme of what does it mean to pivot and do something new? And that can be super scary, and it can be, and it should be scary. I think we should be asking ourselves, am I going this direction because I'm just tempted because everybody else is going this direction? Or am I going this direction because it's the right thing to do and the right time and the right season for my life? And it's hard to know which one is which. And all I can tell you is we generally know, we have kind of a gut level feeling if we're doing something just because everybody else is doing it. And there are certainly strategies that are helpful that we can learn from others and follow the current, and that can be helpful. And that works for some people. But for me, I always find if I'm just going along with the current, I need to pull back and ask myself why, because it really can get to a place of a hustle mentality. And I won't name names, but there's a couple of brands that aren't military specific that I have followed lately where I've watched them pivot more out of the temptation to grow their business and to do this hustle culture mentality, especially on social media. And you can tell when we're doing it out of scarcity. And maybe I need to define scarcity. Scarcity is when there is this void that's in front of you, this space. It could be time. It could be it could be the end of a chapter, the end of a career, or the end of a job, and you don't know what's going to follow it. So it just feels like this empty space, this void that is maybe time, but also no place to put your energy and talent, or maybe you don't know what you want to do yet. And in that void is fear and insecurity of like, oh no, what happens if I lose momentum? Will I lose clients? Will I lose the momentum? Will I lose my creativity? Will I lose opportunities? And so whatever the fear is, whatever the insecurity is, it can really creep in and it creates this scarcity within us. And I'm going to give a huge shout out to Michelle Burr because she usually listens to the podcast episodes and she's a good friend, but also a mentor of mine. And she was the one, I will never forget it, that said to me, Corie, I never make or try to not make any decisions out of scarcity. And she was giving that advice to me at a time where I was entering into a season of scarcity. And since then, I've always asked myself, am I making this decision out of fear in the scarcity? And can I remember her words to go, I'm going to do the best that I can to not make a decision for that reason. So if I'm doing it out of fear and I'm doing what everybody else is doing, chances are if I go that direction, it's going to really look inauthentic. It's really not going to look like genuinely me. Like there was a brief moment where I went onto TikTok, but honestly, I did not have the energy for that. I did not have the creativity for it. And I really deep down inside did not want to do it, but everybody said that's what I needed to do. And it just didn't feel like me. And so I had to take the risk to not do it. But the temptation was out of scarcity. Am I going to lose momentum? Am I going to lose the audience? Is everybody shifting over there? Is that what they actually want? What do I do with the fact that I am best in long form content like this and not in short videos? That was a really hard decision to make. But really it came down to, am I going to be who I'm created to be and be authentic in that? Or am I going to hustle and do what everybody else is doing just because that's the direction of the current? So I think that when we are invited to pivot or we sense that it's an opportunity to pivot in a new direction, that scarcity fear can come up. And it's really usually rooted in insecurity and the temptation to jump on the bandwagon and also create and do based off of the bandwagon principle of marketing, that I need to do what everybody else is doing or I'm going to miss out. Or FOMO is another way, right? That we use that acronym. And I just don't think that that is a good reason or a wise reason to go in a certain direction. So when you find the opportunity in front of you to maybe change the trajectory, again, I think maybe that's number one here, is if it's coming from a place of scarcity, follow the wisdom that Michelle Burr gave of try to not make any decision, or at least pause on your decision making for that moment if you can identify that it's coming from a place of scarcity. So that's number one. Number two, maybe it's building off of this bandwagon hustle principle, but I think number two goes along with it, which is simplify your life when you can. There is an oversaturation of information coming at us all the time. And with that is a ton of options of a million different directions we could go, a million different directions of who we could become. And it can really crowd our creativity and make us think that we need to go in so many directions when really the answer is to simplify. Let me give you a big zoomed out perspective on that. One of my favorite things to do is to talk with people and listen to their story, especially people that are like years ahead of me in age. When people end their career, when they retire from the military, what is the natural progression of a life cycle and where people tend to end up and what matters to them most? And what's been really interesting, the more stories I've listened to and the more examples that I've collected, is that they strive in the beginning to earn credibility, to climb the ladder, to figure out how to get to the top, to become influential, fill in the blank. And then they get there, whatever there is, and then they come down. It's like a bell curve. They kind of come down and everybody ends small. And I don't mean small and insignificant. I mean, their circle becomes small. Their circle of concern becomes small. The things that they want to care about become more precise. And there was an incredible study on happiness that I heard about where they were looking at happiness and age and contentedness. And it was fascinating because they found the older people became, the happier they became, instead of what we think, which is they become lonelier and lonelier and sadder and sadder. And that doesn't mean that there aren't lonely and sad individuals out there as they age. But they were really challenging this notion that the older that you get, the sadder you become. And they actually found the older you get, the more content you become. But the way that they got there was that their circles became smaller, their priorities became sharper and clearer, and they were much more willing to be direct and only chase after those things that mattered and investing their time into what matters. And so when I look at that and I backwards plan from there, I realize that whenever I'm tempted to do more, be more, give more, that eventually the answer is going to be to refine, to simplify, and to do those things that I can do with excellence, with high quality, instead of trying to dilute my talent, my time, and my energy and my creativity to do all the things. And so when you have the opportunity to go in a direction and you feel confused and you feel paralyzed because there's so many options out there. I mean, today with all the social media and information and opportunities that present themselves and lives that we're watching online, it's like a buffet of options of all the things we can do and all the things we can become, whether you're talking about your career or who you are as a parent or a spouse or, as a person. There's just so many options. But this oversaturation of information that has created so many options that we feel paralyzed was also linked to another study that I thought was fascinating. It actually came from the 90s, where they were looking for the most unhappy person that they could find on the planet. Now, this wasn't an actual person, but they wanted to find, what are the variables in a person's life that makes them the most unhappy person. And they actually narrowed it down to a 41-year-old female lawyer. Again, it wasn't an actual person. And so why did this kind of fictional person have to be a 41-year-old female lawyer? Well, they said that women, although there's a lot of stress around equal opportunities and all of that, that women typically have more options than men do. So while men are typically taught to be providers of their family and of their home, that from a very young age, they're encouraged to get a job, work a job, climb the ladder, and provide for their home. That's a very hard and narrow narrative to break away from. Whereas women have more options. They could get a career, they could not get a career. They could be a stay-at-home mom, or they could or not be a mom. Or you could be a mom and work part-time. So there's all these options in the world and at home. Whereas typically, culturally, when you look at especially American men, they've traditionally been taught to be fathers, to be husbands, but to work. But that because you had those options to also be a stay-at-home parent, that was causing a lot of conflict within them. So really it narrowed down to this. The more options we have, the more unhappy and discontent we will be, which I think is fascinating. So, and we are presented with a gazillion options, even every night, on what we do for dinner and what we watch on TV. And so I think that as a society, we are being flooded with so many options. We are not only becoming individualistic and entitled and wanting the world to tailor to us as individuals, but also it's showing that the more options you have, the more complicated your life is, the more unhappy and discontent you will be. So number 2 really comes down to when you're presented with an opportunity to go in another direction, really take a look at, is this an opportunity to simplify my life? And by simplify, I don't mean necessarily do less, because sometimes narrowing your focus, narrowing your niche can be more work, but it's more work in an intensive way that's really pursuing excellence at your craft instead of diluting your time and energy to be all things to all people. And we're only going to find ourselves burned out, less creative, and not able to be excellent at all the things that you have in front of you. I'm sure there's so many parents out there that are listening that identify with that. I've felt that, right? Like I cannot do all the things and be great at all the things. When I feel like I'm being a great mom, I don't feel like I'm doing great in my work. I know men feel that way all the time for sure. So, there's lots of conversation around balance. I guess the new word is harmony instead of balance. But the point is that you can't be great at something without being not great at something else, because it's a forced choice, and to give yourself some grace in that. But that should be all the more reason to not overcomplicate your life and try to do all the things. And so if you have the opportunity to pivot and make a change in your life, thinking about simplifying it could be a path to peace. So let's talk about the imposter syndrome that comes with pivoting in your life, because I definitely have been thinking about that. Somebody asked me once, what do you do with imposter syndrome? Or I think they even asked me, do I struggle with imposter syndrome? And the answer is 100% yes. But I think that in my life and in some of the opportunities that I've seen myself walk through, choose to have the courage to try to take that risk, and then experiencing the journey and then coming out on the other side, it really was, I think, in writing this last book that I recognized that the imposter syndrome feeling is actually the stretching that I'm experiencing in taking the risk. And I think I covered this in the beginning of this season, that I believe we should be periodically experiencing that feeling of imposter syndrome, like this feeling of, can I actually do this? And will I fail? And is this too big of a risk? Or is this going to be overwhelming for me to try to accomplish? That, no, I mean, I do think if something is too big, we should know the difference. But an appropriate stretching, like a next level of challenging yourself, should feel scary. Again, that's a different scary feeling. It's an invitation versus the scarcity feeling. Like the scarcity feeling is, am I doing this out of fear? Am I moving forward out of fear to fill the void? Whereas the imposter syndrome is, am I taking a risk to do something that I don't know how to do right now? The big thing, like where I'm eventually going to end up. Like, let's say writing a book. Like, can I actually write a book? I don't know. You might be feeling that way. Like it feels too big. The idea feels overwhelming. And so it can be really easy out of that imposter syndrome to not take the next step because the step feels too overwhelming. The idea feels overwhelming. And that imposter syndrome, I am more comfortable than ever with looking forward to that feeling because it's an invitation to stretch. Now, if we're living in a constant place of imposter syndrome, then that is probably a sign of a lack of confidence and insecurity, and we need to build confidence as we go. So if that beginning, like those first few steps feel like imposter syndrome, it's going to feel like that for a while, but we should be leveraging that invitation to grow, to try something new, to stretch beyond our comfort zone and learn some new skills. And so as I go into this next season of Restored, the new podcast, of course I feel an imposter syndrome. It feels like, can I actually do this by myself? I feel intimidated by the level of work that it's going to take, the amount of creativity that I'm going to have to leverage. I feel scared about letting you down, that what if I get inconsistent again and I fail at that? Like all of those feelings are challenging me instead of scaring me. I recognize them as an invitation and a challenge to try, because I know if I commit to that journey that I'm going to build confidence and I'm going to see myself accomplish it. And kind of that whole, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? What a terrible metaphor. Who wants to eat an elephant? But the point is just take the next step. And with each next step, you build confidence in this new skill set that you learn along the way. And then you get to the other side of that book, or you get to the other side of the podcast, or you get to the other side of this pivot, and you realize that you did launch a new trajectory, and you learned and you built character and you build new skills and you become a new person and you see yourself evolve. which is why I find myself in this place of, I have done that several times now. I've evolved as a person. It's time for me to rebrand, to shift, and to enter into a space where it's congruent with who I am now, not who I was 10 years ago. I was thinking as I was saying that, there are people listening right now that are going through an intense season of grief where you've lost someone and it feels overwhelming. And you are walking into this new season where you're having to pivot, and it is not a direction you wanted to pivot. And here you are. You've got to shift, and you've got to find your grit, and you've got to just take the next step. And you probably feel like you don't have a choice. And in many ways, you don't have a choice. And I just want to invite you in the same way that feeling of fear, and it takes courage, and there's a risk, and it all feels overwhelming, that is an invitation. It's an invitation to take just the next step. Just take the next step. And every day you just take the next step. And then soon you find yourself on the other side of something. When I look back on the many pivots that I have done so far, and I expect that there's going to be more in my life. I hope that there's more opportunities to pivot. I look back to sacred spaces and that trip overseas, and I stressed so much about what in the world am I doing getting on this plane? How am I going to do this? I don't even know what I'm doing. I don't even know what's being asked of me. I don't know how I'm going to write anything of value. Like, I was so stressed getting on that plane and figuring out, how do I bring something out of this opportunity of value? The thing that I felt like God kept saying to me, and it was the only thing that I felt like he said to me, and this wasn't an audible voice. This was internally when I would pray and go, what do you want me to do? Like, how do you want me to move through this? Like, why? Why am I getting to do this? The only thing I felt like I heard him say for like a week straight, and the only voice that I heard again in my mind, in my spirit during that entire trip, was just get on the plane. Just get on the plane. Get on the first plane. Now get on the second plane. Now get on this plane. Like, just get on the plane. It literally was, just take the next step. You don't have to know how it's all going to work out. And what an incredible journey, but also I never knew it was going to turn into a book. And then, of course, writing the book was just write the next page, or just write the next chapter, or just write the next sentence. Military culture shift felt like that too. Like, I was overwhelmed with the idea of doing it, but it was just show up at my desk today, just one more day. And don't worry about where it's going. Just do the next thing that you feel like is the right thing to do. Even when I pivoted my career from counseling to coaching, even when I recently shut down my counseling practice, like, all of those steps felt overwhelming to do, but it was just taking the next step. And sometimes you won't have all the answers or the business strategy, but if you know that it's the next right step and it's not based off scarcity, or for those of you who are grieving or feel like you're in a forced next step, maybe you got fired from your job or laid off or whatever, just take the next right step and it will make sense. It will all come together. Sometimes the next right step is just to go and journal about it. And something beautiful comes out of writing that journal entry and finding the next level wisdom behind it. So there's so much more that I could probably say about this topic. And if I was sitting across the table from you, it probably could go in a million different directions. But I think the last one that I want to just put out there is number 4, is really about getting the blessing of those around you. I am always going to tell you that it's important to get the blessing, the encouragement, the validation, and the accountability of the people that matter most in your life around you. There are so many temptations to go in all these different directions that we talked about. It's really easy to get off course. And we need outside thinkers, thought partners, and our spouse, sometimes even our kids, to give us feedback on when we're going in a direction that we shouldn't. I played the first episode of Restored to Matt, before I even recorded this episode because I needed to hear from him if this was crazy and it just didn't make sense. Maybe it makes sense in my head, but it doesn't make sense out in the world. And I needed to get his blessing on it. I'm not saying necessarily that you need to run everything by your spouse and get permission as if you can't make decisions for yourself. That can kind of go to a dangerous place. And yet at the same time, this should be a team mentality where your spouse is for you, not against you. So listen to them. You should be for your spouse, not against them. And so giving them feedback as well. But when they're able to encourage you, empower you, to want you to have things that excite you, directions that you want to go and to champion that, but also bringing wisdom of when is the right time and space and season to do these things. And you really need that person when you have to devote more time or energy to something that you probably should be downstairs with your family, but you're needing to ask for extra time to wrap something up. It really helps when you've gotten a blessing in advance on that project or on that trajectory that you're pivoting towards. You need cheerleaders. You need your village of people to champion and support. The books that I've written in my life, even this podcast, would not be what it is today if it wasn't for so many of you that championed it, that encouraged it, that when I wanted to quit early, that said, yes, you can quit if you want to, but yet you're also bringing value and encouragement to the space. And so we could really still use your voice. Like all of those blessings have mattered along the way, but also so has the people in my life that said, hey, if you closed it down, that would be okay too. And so having the blessing either way has been just so beautiful to have in my life. I would encourage you to cast vision, to have these conversations, and to seek out the blessing of your spouse or the important people in your life, and especially the village of people around you that you just really trust, that know you, that really want to champion you and your success. And so whether that's in your career, whether it's in education, whether it's just picking up a new hobby, whatever that is, this next pivot in your life, I just want to encourage you to seek out those blessings. It just makes all the difference. So this is it. This is the place where the Lifegiver Podcast comes to a rest. And that can be okay, that there are seasons, sometimes seasons for friends that come and go, seasons for assignments and where we live that come to a close. There are jobs that come to a close, that there should be various points in our story, chapters that end, but parts of our story that, like music, build in tension and then come to a resolution. I feel really good about this chapter coming to a close. And so again, thank you so much for listening, for following this podcast, for saving it in your list of other podcasts that you listen to, for coming back, for writing me and telling me how it's been of value to you. But that this doesn't have to be a close to our relationship. You can continue to follow me on Substack, is where the long form content is going to stay. And that if you subscribe to the Restored podcast, you will be informed when a new episode comes out for that season. Thank you so much. It's a bittersweet goodbye and a hello in another room. So I look forward to seeing you in that new room. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you over on Restored. Thanks again for listening, and thanks again for following the Lifegiver Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Lifegiver Podcast. Please leave a review, share this episode with your friends, and send me a voice message or connect with me on Substack. You can find out more about me using links in the show notes.